Imagine walking through a quiet forest, when suddenly your dog stops. His ears twitch, his body stiffens, and then you hear it. A faint knocking sound coming from beneath the soil. At first you think it's impossible, but when you dig, your hands scrape against a wooden box. Inside is a woman, alive, gasping for air. And before she collapses, she whispers something so shocking, it will change the lives of everyone who hears it. Who buried her? What secret was she carrying? And why did fate lead a broken ex-soldier and his loyal German shepherd to that exact spot, at that exact moment? This is not just a story about survival. It's about betrayal, redemption, and a miracle that can only be explained by God's hand. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you breathless. The autumn wind swept across the ridges of Pine Ridge, Montana, carrying the dry scent of pine resin and the faint musk of damp soil. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a mosaic of towering evergreens painted with flecks of gold and amber as the season began its slow turn. The sky was clear but sharp, the air thin and crisp, the kind that stung the lungs with every inhale. The place was beautiful, but also harsh, a land where solitude clung to the mountainsides as fiercely as moss to stone. Ethan Walker moved along the narrow trail with the silence of someone who had spent years learning how not to be heard. At 38, Ethan was a man built out of discipline and survival. His height was imposing, standing a shade over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that made him look as though he carried weight even when his hands were empty. His face bore the rugged edges of a man who had endured. Deep-set hazel eyes shadowed under a brow that seemed perpetually furrowed, a square jaw framed with a week's worth of dark stubble, and faint scars across his cheek and forearm, souvenirs from a past he rarely spoke of. Once, Ethan had been part of the U.S. Special Forces, a soldier who had operated in deserts and jungles where silence and steel were the only currencies. But the cost of that life had been steep. Too many brothers lost. Too many nights replaying firefights that refused to fade. Disillusioned, he had left that world and buried himself in the forests of Montana, seeking a peace he doubted he would ever truly earn. His only constant companion padded at his side, moving with the same precision he did. Rex was a German shepherd, 4 years old, his coat a sleek mixture of sable and black, with a proud chest and intelligent amber eyes that missed nothing. He was power contained in sinew and muscle, trained originally by Ethan himself, who had relied on dogs like Rex in his years of service. Loyal to the bone, Rex was both guard and partner, his presence a shield against the solitude of the mountains. He was quick to sense threat, quicker still to act, but beneath the fierce growl and bared teeth was an affection for Ethan that was unshakable. At night, Rex would often lie near the door, ears twitching even in sleep, ready to wake at the faintest sound. The trail wound deeper into the forest. Ethan carried a small pack, standard gear, canteen, compass, first aid kit, and a collapsible shovel strapped to the side. He liked order. He liked preparedness, because the world had taught him that chaos came when you least expected it. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of dried leaves under his boots and the whisper of pine branches rubbing together in the wind. It was Rex who stopped first. His ears shot up, his body stiffening like a coiled spring. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Ethan halted instantly, scanning the tree line. His instincts were still sharp. Silence meant more than noise out here. He crouched, his hand brushing Rex's neck, steadying him. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice low, calm. Rex's nose pressed toward a patch of disturbed earth just off the trail. The soil was darker, fresher, the pine needles above scattered in a way that didn't match the natural pattern of the forest floor. Then Ethan heard it. So faint at first he thought it was his heartbeat in his ears. A sound, a muffled rhythmic tapping. He froze, every nerve ending alive. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too measured. Tap, pause, tap tap, silence, tap. Someone was beneath the earth. Adrenaline surged through him. Without wasting a second, Ethan unstrapped the shovel, drove its blade into the soil, and began to dig with brutal force. Rex joined him, paws tearing at the loose dirt with frantic urgency. The deeper Ethan went, the clearer the sound became. Desperate knocks growing weaker, then stronger again, as if whoever was down there knew salvation had come. Minutes felt like hours until the metal edge struck wood with a hollow thud. Ethan clawed at the dirt with his bare hands, uncovering the corner of a crude wooden box. His chest tightened. Who would bury someone alive here, in the middle of Montana's wilderness? He pried his fingers under the edge, yanked with a grunt, and with Rex's paws clawing beside him, the lid cracked open. Inside lay a woman. She was curled awkwardly, her elegant clothes, an expensive tailored blouse of pale silk and dark trousers, creased and stained with soil. Her face was flushed, damp with sweat, strands of sleek dark hair clinging to her cheeks. She looked to be in her early 30s, striking even in her disarray, with high cheekbones, full lips, and a fragility about her that was betrayed by the sheer force of will in her eyes. Ethan reached in and lifted her carefully. She wasn't frail. Her body had the toned lines of someone who cared for herself, but she trembled violently as fresh air hit her lungs. Her wrists bore angry red marks, raw where restraints had bitten deep. She clutched at his forearm with surprising strength for someone who had just been pulled out of a grave. Her lips moved, voice rasping, almost inaudible. Ethan leaned closer. "I have no one," she whispered, the words tumbling out between shallow breaths. "But if I die, the child will never know." Her eyes rolled back for a moment, her body slumping against him, though not unconscious, simply overwhelmed, dazed, trapped between terror and relief. Ethan glanced at Rex, whose ears twitched, nose still testing the air for danger. His heart pounded against his ribs. Whoever this woman was, whatever she had been buried for, this was no accident. The precision of the box, the restraints, the deliberate attempt to erase her, it spoke of intent. Malicious, cold intent. Cradling her weight with practiced strength, Ethan stepped back from the open grave. The disturbed patch of soil yawned behind them like a warning, like a secret the forest had tried to swallow. He shifted her gently in his arms, studying the bruises on her wrists, the faint chemical tang of sedatives clinging to her clothes. No identification, no bag, nothing but a watch that gleamed faintly in the dimming light. This wasn't chance. This was an execution that had failed. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the familiar prickle of combat readiness slide back over his mind like a second skin. Whoever had done this was still out there, and they wouldn't stop. The night settled over the Montana wilderness like a dark, velvet curtain, the crisp air carrying the scent of pine smoke and cold earth. Ethan Walker's cabin stood alone on the edge of a clearing, a sturdy two-story structure built of hand-hewn logs and fieldstone he had scavenged himself, its small windows glowing with the orange light of a wood-burning stove. The place was remote by design, no neighbors within miles, no power lines humming, no easy path for strangers to find. Tonight, the isolation felt less like sanctuary and more like a fragile barrier holding back danger. Inside, the cabin was warm but Spartan, its wooden floors scuffed from years of boots and claws. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames flickering over a mantel lined with a few photographs. Ethan's parents long gone. A younger him in uniform with a squad of grinning men, and a small framed image of a leaner Ethan kneeling beside a much younger Rex during training. A single worn sofa faced the fire, a heavy quilt folded on its arm. The kitchen area was tidy, each knife and pan in its place, a habit from years of needing order when everything else was chaos. Isabel Caraway sat on that sofa now, wrapped in the quilt, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, still damp from the cloth Ethan had used to clean the dirt from her face. Freed from the confines of the wooden box, she looked both fragile and defiant, like a queen stripped of her throne, but not her dignity. At 32, she had the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms, yet her long fingers trembled slightly as they clutched a mug of steaming water. Her tailored blouse was gone, replaced by one of Ethan's old flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows. The shirt swallowed her frame, but not the steel in her posture. Ethan crouched near the fire, his broad back to her, preparing a small bowl of antiseptic solution from his first aid kit. His movements were deliberate, efficient, honed by years of patching wounds under far worse conditions. Rex lay stretched across the cabin's threshold, a living sentinel with his head on his paws, amber eyes fixed on the door. The German shepherd's ears twitched every few seconds, catching sounds only he could hear. Shifts in the wind, the crack of a branch outside. "You're not taking me to a hospital," Isabel said quietly, her voice low but steady. It was not a question. "No," Ethan replied without turning. "Not yet. Someone buried you out there. Someone who doesn't want you found. Hospitals are the first places they'll watch." She studied him, her dark eyes narrowing. "You think like a soldier." "I used to be one," he said simply. He handed her the bowl and a clean cloth. "Here, for your wrists." Isabel dipped the cloth into the antiseptic and hissed softly as she pressed it against the raw marks on her skin. "Caraway Financial," she said after a moment, as if the name itself was an admission. "Does that mean anything to you?" Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Investment firm, East Coast, big numbers, that's all I know." "I'm its CEO," she said. Or was. Her mouth tightened. 3 months ago, Caraway Financial completed a hostile acquisition of a speculative hedge fund tied to Barton and Hale. It was supposed to be a clean deal, oversight, restructuring, bringing transparency. But their books were a labyrinth of fake valuations. My auditors exposed everything. The fund collapsed. Barton and Hale lost hundreds of millions overnight. Ethan leaned an elbow on his knee, watching her. "So you think this was retaliation?" "I don't think," she said bitterly. "I know. I'd been receiving anonymous threats for weeks. Emails, letters, even a note slipped under my office door. My security team dismissed them as noise. Then I disappeared on a site visit." Her voice hardened around the phrase. "They wanted it to look like an accident. But a box in the woods isn't an accident. It's a message." Rex gave a low growl, his hackles rising. He rose to his feet and padded toward the door, nose lifted. Ethan's hand dropped automatically to the pistol holstered under his jacket. He rarely needed it here, but he always kept it close. He moved to the window and peered out. Only the night stared back, the wind stirring branches in the glow of a thin moon. After a moment, Rex relaxed and lay back down, though his tail flicked restlessly. Isabel watched the ritual with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "He's trained," she observed. "Rex?" Ethan glanced down at the dog, a faint note of pride in his voice. "Best partner I've ever had. 4 years old. Smarter than most men I served with." "I can believe it," she said softly. Her gaze drifted to the photographs on the mantel. "What made you leave the military?" Ethan hesitated. "Too many good men didn't come back. You start to wonder if you're next, and when you're not, you start to wonder why." He turned back to her, hazel eyes steady. "That's why I live out here. No surprises, no politics, just the woods and the work." Isabel nodded, her expression softening. "You seem like someone who keeps promises." "I do," he said. Silence settled between them for a few minutes, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Rex's quiet breathing. Finally, Isabel set the cloth aside. "When you pulled me out, I said something. About a child." Ethan nodded slowly. "You said, 'If I die, the child will never know.'" Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I wasn't talking about my own child. I don't have any. I was talking about my brother." "Your brother," Ethan repeated. "I was adopted at 7. My records were sealed, but 2 months ago I discovered through a private investigator that I have a younger brother somewhere. He was given up after me. Different family, different state. I don't even know his name. If I had died in that box..." Her voice faltered for the first time. "He would never have known I existed." Ethan studied her, seeing past the CEO's polish to the raw ache beneath. He thought of his own losses, the faces of men who had been like brothers to him. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was who you fought beside. Sometimes it was who you saved. "Do you have any ID?" he asked. She shook her head. "They took everything. My phone, my wallet. All I had was my watch." She held up the gleaming timepiece on her wrist. The inscription caught the firelight. "To IC Hunter W." "Who's W?" Ethan asked. "My adoptive father, William Carraway," she said quietly. "He built the company. Left it to me when he died. He used to tell me Carraway Financial was a family. Barton and Hale used that against me. They called my search for my brother a distraction. Said I wasn't focused." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Sounds like you were focused on the wrong kind of enemy." "Maybe," she admitted. "But I'm not going to stop now. Not with them out there. Not with my brother still missing." Rex rose again, padding to sit beside Isabel. The dog's head came to rest on her knee, his warm weight a silent reassurance. Isabel's hand moved automatically to stroke his fur, and for the first time since she'd been pulled from the ground, she let out a shaky breath that was almost a laugh. "You're safe here for now," Ethan said, standing. "But this place isn't a fortress. We need to be careful. If they know you're alive..." "I understand," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I won't hide forever. I need to take them down." Ethan gave a small nod, more to himself than to her. The familiar edge of operational planning was already sliding into place in his mind. He had pulled her from the earth, but whatever war she was fighting had just arrived at his door. The autumn wind swept across the ridges of Pine Ridge, Montana, carrying the dry scent of pine resin and the faint musk of damp soil. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a mosaic of towering evergreens painted with flecks of gold and amber as the season began its slow turn. The sky was clear but sharp, the air thin and crisp, the kind that stung the lungs with every inhale. The place was beautiful, but also harsh, a land where solitude clung to the mountainsides as fiercely as moss to stone. Ethan Walker moved along the narrow trail with the silence of someone who had spent years learning how not to be heard. At 38, Ethan was a man built out of discipline and survival. His height was imposing, standing a shade over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that made him look as though he carried weight even when his hands were empty. His face bore the rugged edges of a man who had endured. Deep-set hazel eyes shadowed under a brow that seemed perpetually furrowed, a square jaw framed with a week's worth of dark stubble, and faint scars across his cheek and forearm, souvenirs from a past he rarely spoke of. Once, Ethan had been part of the U.S. Special Forces, a soldier who had operated in deserts and jungles where silence and steel were the only currencies. But the cost of that life had been steep. Too many brothers lost. Too many nights replaying firefights that refused to fade. Disillusioned, he had left that world and buried himself in the forests of Montana, seeking a peace he doubted he would ever truly earn. His only constant companion padded at his side, moving with the same precision he did. Rex was a German shepherd, 4 years old, his coat a sleek mixture of sable and black, with a proud chest and intelligent amber eyes that missed nothing. He was power contained in sinew and muscle, trained originally by Ethan himself, who had relied on dogs like Rex in his years of service. Loyal to the bone, Rex was both guard and partner, his presence a shield against the solitude of the mountains. He was quick to sense threat, quicker still to act. But beneath the fierce growl and bared teeth was an affection for Ethan that was unshakable. At night, Rex would often lie near the door, ears twitching even in sleep, ready to wake at the faintest sound. The trail wound deeper into the forest. Ethan carried a small pack, standard gear, canteen, compass, first aid kit, and a collapsible shovel strapped to the side. He liked order, he liked preparedness, because the world had taught him that chaos came when you least expected it. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of dried leaves under his boots and the whisper of pine branches rubbing together in the wind. It was Rex who stopped first. His ears shot up, his body stiffening like a coiled spring. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Ethan halted instantly, scanning the tree line. His instincts were still sharp. Silence meant more than noise out here. He crouched, his hand brushing Rex's neck, steadying him. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice low, calm. Rex's nose pressed toward a patch of disturbed earth just off the trail. The soil was darker, fresher, the pine needles above scattered in a way that didn't match the natural pattern of the forest floor. Then Ethan heard it. So faint at first he thought it was his heartbeat in his ears. A sound, a muffled rhythmic tapping. He froze, every nerve ending alive. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too measured. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Silence. Tap. Someone was beneath the earth. Adrenaline surged through him. Without wasting a second, Ethan unstrapped the shovel, drove its blade into the soil, and began to dig with brutal force. Rex joined him, paws tearing at the loose dirt with frantic urgency. The deeper Ethan went, the clearer the sound became. Desperate knocks growing weaker, then stronger again, as if whoever was down there knew salvation had come. Minutes felt like hours until the metal edge struck wood with a hollow thud. Ethan clawed at the dirt with his bare hands, uncovering the corner of a crude wooden box. His chest tightened. Who would bury someone alive here, in the middle of Montana's wilderness? He pried his fingers under the edge, yanked with a grunt, and with Rex's paws clawing beside him, the lid cracked open. Inside lay a woman. She was curled awkwardly, her elegant clothes, an expensive tailored blouse of pale silk and dark trousers, creased and stained with soil. Her face was flushed, damp with sweat, strands of sleek dark hair clinging to her cheeks. She looked to be in her early 30s, striking even in her disarray, with high cheekbones, full lips, and a fragility about her that was betrayed by the sheer force of will in her eyes. Ethan reached in and lifted her carefully. She wasn't frail. Her body had the toned lines of someone who cared for herself, but she trembled violently as fresh air hit her lungs. Her wrists bore angry red marks, raw where restraints had bitten deep. She clutched at his forearm with surprising strength for someone who had just been pulled out of a grave. Her lips moved, voice rasping, almost inaudible. Ethan leaned closer. "I have no one," she whispered, the words tumbling out between shallow breaths. "But if I die, the child will never know." Her eyes rolled back for a moment, her body slumping against him, though not unconscious, simply overwhelmed, dazed, trapped between terror and relief. Ethan glanced at Rex, whose ears twitched, nose still testing the air for danger. His heart pounded against his ribs. Whoever this woman was, whatever she had been buried for, this was no accident. The precision of the box, the restraints, the deliberate attempt to erase her, it spoke of intent. Malicious, cold intent. Cradling her weight with practiced strength, Ethan stepped back from the open grave. The disturbed patch of soil yawned behind them like a warning, like a secret the forest had tried to swallow. He shifted her gently in his arms, studying the bruises on her wrists, the faint chemical tang of sedatives clinging to her clothes. No identification, no bag, nothing but a watch that gleamed faintly in the dimming light. This wasn't chance. This was an execution that had failed. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt the familiar prickle of combat readiness slide back over his mind like a second skin. Whoever had done this was still out there, and they wouldn't stop. The weather turned sour over the following days, as though the forest itself sensed that something unnatural lingered among the pines. A cold rain swept across Pine Ridge, hammering the roof of Ethan Walker's cabin, rattling the shutters, and sinking the clearing into a wet gloom. The dirt paths became slick mud, the streams swelled with runoff, and even the animals seemed reluctant to stir. For Ethan, the storm offered cover, a natural cloak for the choices they were about to make. Isabel Caraway adapted quickly to her new environment. Gone was the image of the immaculately dressed CEO of Caraway Financial. Instead, she wore Ethan's spare clothes, oversized flannels, thick socks, and a weather-beaten jacket that had once belonged to him. She moved with a quiet determination, her dark hair tied back, her sharp features softened by fatigue but sharpened again by resolve. Days of hiding had not broken her composure. If anything, they had hardened it. She spent hours at Ethan's small kitchen table, sorting through fragments of memory, scraps of information, and printouts Ethan had helped her recover from an old encrypted flash drive she had insisted on carrying. Those files were Isabel's lifeline. They contained a series of emails and coded spreadsheets, painstakingly decoded over nights spent with little sleep. They revealed how Barton and Hale had disguised their embezzlement through a lattice of charitable foundations, phantom nonprofits that supposedly funneled money into orphanages, disaster relief, and education projects. In reality, the funds looped through shell corporations before landing offshore. Ethan watched her lean over the documents, her slender fingers tracing lines of figures, her lips tightening when the paths of corruption became clear. "You see here?" Isabel explained one evening, her voice calm but laced with fury. "A transfer of $3 million, supposedly to a school rebuilding program in Florida. But the school doesn't exist. That money lands in a Cayman account under a false trustee. Every path ends the same way, back to Barton and Hale." Ethan studied the pages, not the numbers. He trusted her intellect for that. But her expression. She was tired, but not broken. Beneath the exhaustion was steel, and for the first time since pulling her from the dirt, he began to believe she could fight her way back. The rain gave them time. It also gave Ethan space to plan. His instincts told him their enemy would not simply stop because Isabel had vanished. They would assume she was dead, or soon would be. But if she reappeared too suddenly, suspicion would flare. What they needed was misdirection. "We make them believe you're still gone," Ethan said one night, his hazel eyes lit by firelight. His voice was calm but carried the command of a man used to giving orders under pressure. "Let them think their plan worked. You stay under, and in that time, I'll find where they operate. We need leverage, proof, not just your word." Rex stirred at his feet, lifting his head as if sensing the weight of the decision. The dog's amber eyes flicked between them, ears twitching to the storm outside. "And how do you propose we get this proof?" Isabel asked. "I'll do what I was trained to do," Ethan replied. "Recon, tracking, following trails most people don't notice. Rex will help." So the days unfolded into a careful routine. Isabel stayed hidden, sharpening her notes, mapping the money. Ethan scouted when the rain eased, slipping through the forest with Rex at his side, studying tire tracks, listening for whispers on the edges of town. He returned with mud on his boots, water dripping from his jacket, eyes sharper each time. It was Rex who gave them their first lead. On the third evening, after the rain had slackened into drizzle, Ethan noticed Rex stop suddenly near the tree line. The dog's nose pressed into the earth, his ears perked forward, tail rigid. Ethan crouched, examining the ground. The soil was darker, pressed by heavy treads. Truck tires, multiple passes, coated with a sheen of oil that mixed with rainwater. The scent of fuel lingered strong enough that even Ethan could detect it. "Good boy," Ethan murmured, scratching behind Rex's ears. He traced the trail, finding where it cut through the trees toward a service road seldom used. His instincts told him to follow it. That night, he told Isabel. Her dark eyes lit with both fear and a spark of hope. "If they're meeting somewhere, if they're careless enough to gather, we could record them." Ethan nodded. "But we can't just barge in. We'll need eyes." The next day, he reached out to an old contact. Jacob Ellis arrived 2 days later, driving a mud-spattered SUV that looked like it had seen more stakeouts than car washes. Ellis was in his mid-40s, tall but a little stooped from too many hours, hunched over laptops and steering wheels. His brown hair was thinning at the crown, his jaw square but softened by the beginning of a beard he hadn't bothered to shave. He wore thick-rimmed glasses that framed sharp gray eyes, the eyes of someone who noticed details others missed. His clothes were plain, dark jacket, jeans, boots, and his handshake was firm, though his palms bore the calluses of a man who carried his own equipment. Ellis had a reputation in investigative circles. He'd exposed corrupt contractors in D.C., followed money trails through Caribbean shell companies, and once nearly been arrested in Eastern Europe for digging too close to an oligarch's slush fund. Cynical but unflinchingly honest, he was not a man who trusted easily, and yet when Ethan explained the situation, Ellis simply adjusted his glasses and said, "Then we get proof, or the bastards walk free." They set up a plan. Ellis provided a pair of miniature cameras disguised as utility fixtures, each no larger than a button. Ethan would plant them near the suspected site. Isabel, against Ethan's protests, insisted on helping configure the equipment. Her fingers deft on the keyboard as she tested signal clarity, her face lit by the glow of the laptop in the dim cabin. The opportunity came on a moonless night. Guided by Rex, Ethan followed the muddy road until it widened into a clearing. There, hidden behind decaying timber walls, stood an old warehouse, long abandoned by the looks of its cracked windows and sagging roof, but with tire tracks fresh in the dirt outside. A faint glow seeped from a gap in the boards, and the low rumble of voices drifted into the night. Ethan's pulse slowed, his training taking over. He slipped through the brush, Rex close and silent at his heel, the cameras tucked in his vest. He moved with practiced precision, circling the structure, planting the devices where they would capture entrances and interiors. Through a narrow gap, he glimpsed the scene inside. 3 men gathered near a folding table, a duffel bag half unzipped spilling stacks of bundled cash. One of the men, tall with a shaved head and a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, counted the money. His voice carried, "Mr. Hale wants this finished. No mistakes this time. The girl should have stayed buried." Ethan felt Rex stiffen, a low growl vibrating in the dog's chest. He placed a hand on Rex's back, steadying him before slipping away. The cameras blinked silently, recording everything. When Ethan returned to the cabin, soaked in rain and mud, Isabel was waiting by the fire. Ellis hunched over the laptop, headphones on, his face grim as the audio played. Isabel's hand flew to her mouth as she heard her near-death dismissed so casually. But Ethan's voice was steady, calm, honed to the razor edge of certainty. "We have them," he said. The fog rolled thick across Denver's industrial district, a gray shroud that blurred neon signs into smears of color and muffled the echo of distant traffic. The old warehouse that served as Barton and Hale's secondary office loomed like a monolith at the end of a deserted street, its steel facade streaked with rust, its high windows glowing faintly through the haze. The night was cold and wet, a thin drizzle clinging to skin and clothing, a reminder of how inhospitable the world became when shadows claimed it. Ethan Walker crouched in the darkness across the street, his back pressed against a rain-slick brick wall. He wore black tactical gear, his face half hidden under a hood, his hazel eyes sweeping every angle with the precision of a man who had lived too long on battlefields. Beside him, Rex shifted silently, the German shepherd's coat damp, ears pricked, amber eyes gleaming as they tracked every movement in the mist. Rex was restless but obedient. Years of training held him steady, even though his muscles quivered with anticipation. In the back seat of a nondescript sedan parked a block away, Isabel Caraway adjusted the collar of her borrowed coat. She had disguised herself carefully, her dark hair cut short and dyed a plain chestnut, her sharp cheekbones dulled by minimal makeup, her tailored figure hidden beneath layers of neutral clothing. Yet no disguise could strip away the intensity in her eyes, the determination that had carried her from a box in the ground to this moment. Around her neck hung a recording device, the size of a locket, pulsing faintly with a red light. Jacob Ellis sat in the driver's seat of the sedan, watching her with wary respect. The journalist was not a soldier, but he had the nerves of one. His square jaw was set, his thinning brown hair plastered to his forehead with rain, his gray eyes flicking between Isabel and the rearview mirror. He tapped a small earpiece, connecting her feed to the laptop balanced on his knees. Audio's live. Whatever he says, it'll stick. Are you ready? Isabel took a breath, her fingers tightening briefly on the door handle. Ready or not, I have to be. She slipped out of the car and walked toward the warehouse, each step echoing faintly on wet pavement. Inside, the glow of overhead lights illuminated the stark interior. Concrete floors, steel beams, the faint hum of ventilation. The vast room was largely empty save for a conference table near the center, flanked by leather chairs and a bar cart of untouched liquor. Victor Hale stood waiting. At 55, Victor was a man built from power and arrogance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed silver hair and a face cut from stone. His jaw was square, his mouth thin, and his pale blue eyes glinted like ice under fluorescent light. His tailored navy suit was perfectly pressed despite the late hour, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist. To most of Wall Street, he was a visionary financier, co-founder of Barton and Hale, a man who turned risk into fortune. To Isabel, he was the architect of her near death. Isabel, he said smoothly, his voice cultured, polished, but laced with disbelief. My God, alive. We thought you were... Save it, she cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. She stepped closer, pulling her coat tighter around her. We both know where I've been. Buried in Pine Ridge, in a wooden box your men built. Victor's mask didn't falter, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. He chuckled, low and dismissive. You've been under tremendous stress. Trauma can create false memories. Let me help you. A doctor, perhaps. Her words sliced through his performance. If I imagined it, why did your man say I should have been buried deeper? From the shadows near the wall, one of his enforcers shifted uneasily. It was the same scarred man Ethan had glimpsed at the warehouse days before, the jagged line from temple to jaw twisting as his lips curled. His hand hovered near the pistol at his side. Victor's facade cracked, his voice rising. You should never have come back. This was supposed to be finished. In the fog outside, Ethan moved. He slipped through a side door he had scouted earlier, his footsteps silent, his senses honed. Rex patted at his heel, every muscle taut. Isabel pressed forward, her locket glowing faintly. You siphoned millions from false charities, Victor. You funded your empire on stolen futures. You tried to erase me because I could prove it. Victor's fist clenched on the table's edge. You think anyone will believe you? The board trusts me. The market trusts me. You're just a spoiled orphan playing CEO. Isabel's voice didn't waver. Then why did you have me buried alive? Why did your men carry cash in bags and speak your name? The scarred man snapped. He drew his weapon, the steel gleaming under the lights. Before he could aim, Ethan emerged from the shadows, a blur of motion. His arm locked around the gunman's wrist, twisting sharply until the pistol clattered to the floor. Rex lunged, teeth bared, slamming into the man's legs and dragging him to the ground with a guttural snarl. Chaos erupted. Isabel pressed back, her hand clutched around the recorder as Victor staggered away from the table. Ethan drove his knee into the enforcer's ribs, disarming him fully, while Rex held him pinned with teeth inches from his throat. The man froze, terror cutting through his defiance. Victor's voice thundered. You'll regret this, Isabel! Do you know who I am? The doors burst open. Floodlights flared as Denver police officers stormed in, guided by the live feed Jacob Ellis had transmitted. Behind them, Jacob himself entered, press credentials around his neck, laptop in hand. His face was grim but victorious. The lead officer barked, "Victor Hale, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and financial crimes." Victor's composure finally cracked. He tried to speak, but Isabel lifted the recorder and played his words back into the air. The sound of his anger, his threats, his slip about finishing the job filled the warehouse. The officers didn't hesitate. They cuffed him, ignoring his shouts of influence and power. Ethan released the scarred enforcer into the custody of two officers, calling Rex back with a sharp command. The dog padded to his side, chest heaving, his eyes still fierce but obedient. Isabel stood trembling, her shoulders squared, her dark eyes blazing. She looked at Victor being led away, then at Ethan and Rex. "It's over," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, this was just the battle. The war will be in court." Jacob stepped forward, snapping his laptop shut. "And in the headlines, trust me, by morning, the whole world will know." For the first time in days, Isabel exhaled fully. "Then tomorrow, we begin again. Not just with charges, with rebuilding, and with finding the one person who still doesn't know I exist." Her words hung in the cold warehouse air, the promise of justice intertwined with the quiet ache of family. Spring had come to Pine Ridge, soft and luminous, as if the forest itself had decided to breathe again after months of silence and storms. The snow had long melted, leaving rivulets of water running down the mountain's sides, nourishing carpets of green moss and clusters of wildflowers that burst with color at the forest's edge. The air was gentle now, tinged with pine and damp soil, while shafts of sunlight filtered through the high canopy, painting golden mosaics on the ground. What had once been a place of fear and burial now felt like a sanctuary reborn. Ethan Walker leaned against the wooden railing of his cabin's porch, his broad frame relaxed in a way that would have startled anyone who knew him years earlier. He wore a faded work shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal the corded muscle of his arms. His hazel eyes softened as they followed Rex. The German shepherd bounded through the clearing, 4 years old and still full of restless energy, his sable and black coat gleaming in the light. Every so often, Rex would pause, nose pressed to the earth, as if searching for something invisible, before returning to his play. Inside, the crackle of a kettle on the stove drifted through the open window. Isabel Caraway emerged, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She no longer looked like the woman Ethan had pulled from a wooden box months earlier. Her face was healthier, her eyes clearer, and though the weight of what had happened to her lingered, she carried it differently now, with resolve, not burden. She wore a simple cream blouse tucked into dark jeans, her dark hair left loose, shimmering with new life in the sun. She handed Ethan a mug, her lips curving into a faint smile. "You're quieter than usual." "Just listening," he replied, taking the tea. "Spring has its own sound." She followed his gaze toward the trees, where the wind whispered through branches like a chorus of secrets. "It feels different now," she admitted. "This forest, it's no longer just the place I was buried. It's where I began again." Ethan glanced at her, then nodded. He understood. He too had found something unexpected in the aftermath, a purpose beyond survival. The world outside their clearing had shifted dramatically since Victor Hale's arrest. Barton and Hale had collapsed under the weight of exposure. Their shareholders fled, their names stained beyond repair. Isabel had returned to Boston for months to face boardrooms and courtrooms, her voice calm but unyielding as she rebuilt Caraway Financial's reputation. She had liquidated corrupt assets, returned millions to stolen charities, and founded a new initiative, the Foundation for Children and Nature, a merger of her two causes, the vulnerable children she once had been, and the wild landscapes that had given her sanctuary. But her greatest victory had not been in business. It had been personal. Ethan heard footsteps on the path and turned as a figure approached. A young man of 17 came into view, tall for his age but still carrying the awkward lankiness of adolescence. His dark hair was tousled by the breeze, his skin lightly tanned, his brown eyes curious yet guarded. He wore a simple hoodie and jeans, a backpack slung over one shoulder. This was Ethan Caraway Jr., Isabel's younger brother, the one she had feared she would never find. Raised in Seattle by adoptive parents, Ethan Jr. had only recently discovered the truth of his family. He was still adjusting, still wary, but there was a flicker of recognition in the set of his jaw, one that mirrored Isabel's. "Thought I'd find you out here," Ethan Jr. said, his voice low but steady. He glanced at Isabel, then at Ethan Walker. "It's peaceful, different from the city." Isabel stepped forward, her expression softening. She reached to touch her brother's arm. "You belong here as much as I do. You don't have to decide anything now. Just know you're not alone anymore." The boy's eyes flicked toward Rex, who bounded up to him and nudged his hand with a wet nose. For the first time, Ethan Jr. smiled. He knelt, scratching Rex behind the ears. "He's incredible." "Saved your sister's life," Ethan Walker said simply. "And mine, more than once." Isabel's gaze shimmered. She crouched, placing a hand gently on Rex's head. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost reverent. "It was you who heard me first. You dug me out when the world wanted me silent." Rex wagged his tail, leaning into her touch. Ethan Walker watched the moment, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And we've been digging each other out ever since," he said quietly. The sun broke through the canopy just then, streaming across them, as if nature itself had chosen to bless this fragile family they were forming. Isabel stood, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She turned to Ethan Walker, her expression firm yet hopeful. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. "The foundation has approved funding for a new project here in Montana, a wilderness education center, dedicated to teaching children survival skills and conservation. I can appoint anyone to lead it. But I want you. You've lived this life. You've earned their respect already." Ethan studied her, his jaw tightening in thought. The soldier in him resisted obligations. The man he had become knew it was the right path. He glanced at Rex, who circled them in a playful sprint, as though sensing the importance of the moment. Finally, Ethan nodded once. "If it means giving kids the tools to stand on their own, I'll do it." Rex barked sharply, running another circle as though giving his approval. Isabel laughed, the sound freer than Ethan had ever heard from her. Even Ethan Jr. chuckled, his shoulders loosening as the clearing filled with warmth. Above them, the wind sighed through the tall pines, carrying with it a whisper that seemed almost familiar. Isabel stilled for a moment, listening. She turned her face to the sky. "It sounds like the knocking," she murmured. "Not desperate anymore. Just a reminder that even when buried, there's always a chance to rise." Ethan Walker reached for her hand, his rough palm meeting hers, steady and sure. "Then let's make sure no one else stays buried," he said. The three of them stood together in the golden light. The soldier who sought peace, the woman who had been reborn, the brother who had been found, and the loyal dog who had heard what no one else could. Around them, the forest whispered, carrying forward the first sound of salvation, the faint, steady rhythm of life insisting on being heard. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen in cathedrals or under stained glass. They happen in the silence of a forest, in the loyalty of a dog, or in the hand of a stranger who chooses to dig us out when the world has buried us. Isabel's story reminds us that even in the darkest places, God can send light, not always as thunder or fire from the heavens, but through people who dare to love, through loyalty that does not waver, and through the courage to begin again. And maybe that is the message for us all. Every day we meet people who are silently knocking, struggling with despair, grief, or loneliness. Perhaps you are the one chosen to hear them, to reach out, to dig them free. That too is a miracle. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the unseen hand of God in our daily lives. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He watch over you and those you love, and may you never miss the gentle knocking of a miracle waiting to be heard.